Alright, so in this video, we're gonna go through Wave from the very beginning. And I mean from the point where you're still outside the account all the way through to actually using it in a practical way to manage your bookkeeping. So this is not just going to be a quick little feature tour where I point out the buttons and move on. I actually want to show you how to go from a fresh account to a setup that actually makes sense, because that's usually the part where people need help with the most. Now, before we jump into the platform itself, I actually want to set the stage for a second, because if you've looked into bookkeeping softwares before, then you already know the usual names that come up. Like QuickBooks is one of the first things that people recommend, and while it's still one of the biggest names in the accounting software, it can get pretty expensive really quickly, especially once you start adding features that people actually want. Then you've also got tools like Xero and FreshBooks, which can also help in certain situations, but a lot of smaller businesses still end up wanting something that feels simpler, lighter, and actually easier to get started with. And that's really where Wave fits in, because Wave is one of those platforms that works especially well if you're a freelancer, a small service business, a creator, a solo business owner, or just somebody who needs to send invoices, track money coming in and going out, organize customers and vendors, and actually understand what's happening financially without building out some giant accounting machine. So if that sounds like the kind of business setup you have, then this walkthrough is really gonna help. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is simply head over to the Wave website. And once I'm here, the one thing that I actually want to start with is the pricing section, because this is where you make the first real decision. And I always think it's better to understand what plan you're choosing before you actually create the account. So this actually just makes sure that there's no confusion later on. Alright, so now that I'm on the pricing page, you see the main plan options. And in this example, I'm going to choose the starter plan, which is the free one. And it's actually the one that makes the most sense for a beginner walkthrough, because it lets you understand the platform without immediately paying for every extra convenience feature. Now, the important thing to understand here is that Starter is not some useless stripped down shell. It actually still gives you the core of what a small business actually needs. You can create invoices, track transactions, manage customers, manage vendors, use reports, and even build out a proper bookkeeping workflow. The main difference between Starter and Pro is really the automation and convenience. So the paid side is more about things like faster workflows, more automation, receipt scanning, and some of the extra tools that actually save you time. But for learning the structure of the platform and actually understanding how it works, Starter is a pretty good place to start. So once I've decided on that, I'm simply gonna click on the button to get started with Starter. From here, Wave gives me a couple of ways to sign up. I can continue with Google or even just enter my email and my password manually. For this example though, I'm gonna go with the normal email route because it's actually easier to follow on screen, and it also matches a really common beginner path. So right here, I'm gonna be entering my email address like this one. Okay. And I'm also gonna create a password. So just a second. Nice. Once I'm done, I'm now going to continue into the next flow. And this is where Wave actually starts its 3-step onboarding process. So right now, I'm not inside the real dashboard yet. I'm still giving Wave the information it needs to build the starting environment properly. The first screen asks for my name, my business name, what the business does, and the legal structure of the business. So I'm simply going to go through this one piece at a time. My first name is going to go here, like this one. And then my last name is going to be here. Okay, now this is where it asks for the business name. So I'm going to type in Tuli STO. And right underneath this is where it asks what the business does. So I'm going to be opening the drop down and selecting the option that best fits the example business. So if Tuli STO is a service business, so something like consulting, digital services, or creative work, I want to choose the industry that reflects that as closely as possible. Then right below that, it asks for the legal structure of the business. And this matters because it affects how the business is categorized inside the account. So here I'm going to be choosing the right structure for the example. And once all of this looks correct, I'm simply going to go ahead and click next. Then Wave is going to bring me into the second onboarding step, and this is now where it asks for a few more business questions. So this is where it asks what year the business started, how many customers we have, whether we accept payments online, and whether we've used paid bookkeeping softwares before. So here I'm just going to move through the fields one by one. I'm going to select the year from the drop down. Okay. Then I'm also going to choose the range for the customer count. And I'm also going to choose whether the business accepts payments online. And then I can also answer whether I've used paid bookkeeping softwares before. If I say yes to this, Wave simply expands the options beneath and lets me choose which software I've used. So things like QuickBooks, FreshBooks, Xero, or something else. So I'm going to simply make the selection that fits the example and then continue. Then on the next onboarding step, Wave asks what would I like to do in Wave. And this is actually a nice screen because it gives you a few simple starting paths instead of just throwing you into the platform code. So here I can choose something like send good looking invoices, run easy payroll, organize your books, or even not sure yet. In this walkthrough, I'm going to choose the option that lines up with the most common beginner use case, which is sending invoices first, because that's one of the fastest ways to make Wave useful. So I'm going to click on this card, then hit next. After that, Wave also shows the plan screen again. So it actually has Starter and Pro side by side. So even though I already selected Starter, this is basically the final chance to decide whether I want to stay on the free plan or upgrade. Since the whole point of this is to build this out in a beginner-friendly way without adding more cost, I'm simply gonna select Continue and Starter again. Then next, Wave actually takes me to the two-step authentication screen. And this is one of those little setup details that people sometimes forget to show, but it's actually part of the real first-time flow. And it actually matters. So here, Wave offers a couple of ways to set up two-factor authentication, like using an authenticator app or even a phone number. But since I'm trying to keep the setup moving and not go too deep into account security settings right now, I'm going to choose skip for now. That lets me keep moving through the setup without getting stuck. But this is actually very essential, so please do make sure to set up two-factor authentication whenever you have free time. Alright, so right after this, Wave also shows the email verification screen. So this is where it tells me to go verify the email address that I used during the sign up. So what I'm going to do here is simply switch over to Gmail and make sure that I'm logged into the same account that I used for Wave. Then I'm going to find the verification email they sent, like this one, and then I'm going to open it and click on this link. Once this part is done, I will then have to go back to the Wave tab and click the button that says I have verified my email. This confirms everything and moves me into the real account. Now, once I get into the dashboard, this is usually the point where people start clicking randomly because it feels like there is a lot on screen and they just want to figure it all out immediately. But I actually think the better move is to slow down for a second and get your bearings, alright? So on the left side, you've got the main navigation, and this is where most of your work is going to happen. You can see dashboard, sales and payments, purchases, receipts, accounting, banking, payroll, reports, and a bunch of other sections. Then near the top on the left side, you've also got the create new button, which is basically your shortcut anytime you want to create something quickly without digging through menus. Now, the dashboard itself is really just the financial overview area. At the beginning, because this is a fresh account, it's mostly setup guidance and placeholder style widgets, so you might see areas for cash flow, profit and loss, net income, and other summaries. But none of that is going to feel especially meaningful yet, because there isn't enough real activity in the system. And that's totally normal because the dashboard becomes more useful later on, after the rest of the setup is done and actual business activity starts flowing through it. So instead of sitting on the dashboard for too long, I'm simply going to move into one of the most practical parts of the platform first, which is invoicing. So I'm going to click into sales and payments, then simply go into invoices. And this is where something happens the first time around that's pretty useful. So Wave doesn't just drop me into the plain invoice form, it actually wants me to set up how the invoice is going to look first. And honestly, this makes a lot of sense because I'm going to be sending invoices to real clients. And I want the branding to look clean right from the start. So the first thing that I'm going to do is simply upload the business logo. So right here in the upload area, I'm going to click into it. Then I'm going to browse my files. So I'm going to select our logo from my computer. Okay, and once that uploads, Wave also gives me the option to update the color accent so it can actually match the logo. So if I like the brand color it suggests, I can simply accept that, but if I don't, I can also keep the current color and adjust it myself. Then underneath that, I've also got the accent color section where I can fine-tune the look, and then after that, I can also choose the invoice template style. So I'm just going to go through that slowly so I can actually make the invoices look exactly how I want it to look. And then once I'm happy with the preview, I'm simply going to continue. Now that the invoice branding step is done, the invoice section is going to be fully accessible. Alright, so now that I'm inside the actual invoice creation screen, this is where things start feeling much more real. Because up until now, we've mostly been building the environment around the business, setting up the account, getting through onboarding, putting the branding in place, and getting familiar with the layout. But right here is where the platform starts turning into something that you can actually use to run a business. This is the point where Wave stops feeling like a setup wizard and starts feeling like a real working tool. Because an invoice is not just a nice looking page you send to somebody, it's one of the clearest financial events your business will create. It tells the client what they owe, it tells you what revenue you expect to receive, and it also gives the software a record that it can later connect to your reports and bookkeeping. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is just pause for a second and look at the structure of the screen without rushing into it. Because once you understand the layout, invoicing becomes much easier. So at the top, I can already see the business branding in place. So I can see the logo, I can see the overall style that I selected earlier, of course. And that really matters way more than it might seem at first. Because if you're sending invoices to real clients, this is part of your representation. Even if the client only glances at your invoice for a few seconds, the overall look affects how professional the business feels. So having your logo there, having the color feel consistent, and having the invoice look clean right away is actually really helpful. It's one of those things where you set it once and then every invoice after that benefits from it without any extra effort. Then underneath that top area, I've also got the invoice heading and summary area. And this is useful depending on how you run your business. You might want to give the invoice a little bit more context. So if this is a general monthly support invoice, I could leave it fairly simple, but if it's tied to a particular project, I might use the summary to mention the project name or the billing period. So for example, I might write something like monthly support for May, website maintenance retainer, brand design phase 2, or consulting service for April. That way, if the client gets multiple invoices from me over time, it's easier for us to know what this specific one refers to without opening a separate email thread or trying to remember the context from memory. Then right below that, I've also got the customer section, and this is where I want to slow down and be intentional because the customer record is not just for this one invoice. It becomes part of the business system moving forward. So if I click on add a customer, and that opens up the customer form. Okay, so for this example, I'm going to create a client called Bright Lane Media. Okay, and as I type this in, I'm literally thinking not just about this invoice, but about what will actually make life easier later on. So of course, I'm gonna put in the customer name, and then I'm also gonna add the email address. And this email field is one of the most important ones in the whole form, because if I'm using Wave to send invoices directly, this is the address that the invoice is gonna go to. So if I enter something that's correct now, I literally don't have to keep retyping it every single month or every single time I create a new invoice. So we can write something like billing@brightlanemedia.com. Okay. Now, if I want to be even more organized, I can also fill in extra details like the billing address, a phone number, maybe even the primary contact person. Maybe I could also add internal notes if this is a client with special payment terms or a different approval flow. And this is one of those places where there isn't one perfect answer for everyone. If you're a very simple business and you just want to get moving, you can absolutely keep it minimal and only add the essential information. But if you know that this client is going to stick around for a while, or you know you need clean records later, putting in a little detail here can save a lot of time. So for example, if Brightline Media always wants invoices sent to a finance person instead of a founder, or if they have net 15 terms instead of immediate payment, or they also could require a purchase order number, those are the kind of things you would start thinking about when your invoicing process matures. But for now, to keep the first invoice moving, I'll just keep it simple, simply save the customer, and now the record is not only attached to this invoice, but it's also saved inside Wave for future use. And this is really an important shift to say out loud because this is where the software starts becoming cumulative. I'm not just typing information into a one-off document, I am literally rebuilding reusable records so that next time I create an invoice, I won't need to re-enter Brightlane Media. I can just select it from a list. And once you start doing this for multiple clients, that's when Wave starts saving you a lot of real time instead of just looking organized from the surface. Now, I'm also going to move down into the item section, and this is where I actually describe what the business is billing for. And I think of this as one of the most valuable parts to explain properly because this is the part clients care about the most. If the customer name tells who the invoice is for, then the item section tells what they're actually paying for. So instead of leaving this vague, I want to make it specific enough that it's clear, but not so overloaded that it becomes messy. So let's say Thuli STO sells a monthly support service. I'm literally going to click into the item name field and type in monthly support plan. Okay, that's the label. Then right below that, I've also got the description field, and this is where I can clarify the scope a little bit more. I might write something like ongoing support, updates, and maintenance for the month. Okay, or it could also be something like monthly consulting support and implementation guidance, or maybe website updates and performance checks for May. The point is not to write a paragraph, but to just give it enough context that if the client looks at the invoice later, they know exactly what this line was referring to. Then I've also got quantity, and for a simple monthly service, that's usually just one, but it's worth explaining what this field is really for, because depending on the business, this can change the whole invoicing style. So if, for example, I'm billing hourly, quantity might be the number of hours. And if I'm billing for sessions, then quantity might be the number of sessions. If I'm selling a digital product license to multiple users, quantity might be the number of licenses. So this field is simple but flexible. In this case, I'm going to leave it at 1 because this is a single monthly plan. Then I can also move over to price. And let's say this service costs $1,200. I would simply type in 1,200. Okay. And as soon as I do that, Wave literally calculates the amount automatically. Now this is where the screen starts becoming really useful because I can already see what the invoice total is shaping up to. And if I wanted to make this even more realistic, I could also add additional line items. For example, maybe there's a monthly support plan at $1,200. And then there's also a one-time onboarding fee of $300, or maybe there's an extra design revision block for $200. Or on top of this, I could also be bundling 10 consulting hours at $100 each instead of a flat plan. So the line item area is not just one single purpose box, it's actually flexible enough to support flat fee hours, hourly billing, package pricing, and hybrid billing, or depending on how your business works, of course. And this is also a really useful place to explain something practical that helps people avoid confusion later on. The more clearly you structure the item lines now, the fewer questions you tend to get later on. So if you send vague invoices, clients are more likely to email you asking what something means. If the line items are clear and sensible, payments tend to move more smoothly because there's literally less uncertainty. So part of using invoice software as well is not just showing how to fill in the fields, it's actually knowing how to write line items in a way that reduces friction. Now underneath or near the line item section, depending on how the screen is arranged on your side, I can also control things like discount, tax, and currency. And these are actually worth talking through a little bit because they often get skipped in basic tutorials. So let's say I promised Brightline Media a discount for the first month. Instead of just calculating that by hand and rewriting the whole invoice, I can use the discount section and let the system reflect it clearly. Or let's say I need to apply tax. That's something I could handle properly so the invoice amount matches what I actually expect to collect. Or maybe I might even bill in another currency. That's where the currency setting really matters. So even though most of you guys will use the default settings at first, it's really worth pointing out that these controls are just meant to help the invoice reflect the real commercial arrangement and not just approximate numbers. Alright, so from here I can also move into the invoice details, and this is another area that sounds basic but it also matters a lot. I've got the invoice number, the invoice date, and the due date. And this is where I start thinking about payment expectations. So if I want payment immediately, I can also set the due date accordingly. So if I use something like net 7, net 15, or net 30 terms, this literally gets reflected right here. And this is more than just a calendar field, it sets the whole tone for how your business expects to be paid. So if your business has clear payment expectations, then your invoice should really reflect that. So if I'm trying to get paid quickly, I might want that due date to support that. If I work with bigger companies that take longer, maybe I could build that into the due terms. So this is where business policy and software really start meeting each other. Then I can also reach into the notes and terms section. So this is one of the most underrated parts of the invoice. A lot of people either ignore it completely or treat it like a filler, but this is actually a great place to clarify things that don't fit neatly into the line items. So I might use this area to say thank you for your business, or even to explain that the payment is due within 7 days. Or I could even mention what happens next once a payment is received. So for example, I could write something like, thank you for your business. Okay, then please submit payment within 7 days. Work for the next billing cycle continues after payment is received. Okay, just like that. It doesn't have to be super long, guys. And if I'm a consultant, I might also say something like, this invoice covers advisory support for the month of May. Please reach out if you need a breakdown of hours or project scope. So this area literally helps you sound more professional while also reducing back and forth conversations. And this is one of those moments where it's really worth saying out loud what the invoice is doing in the background, because it's easy to get lost in the visual side of it. This invoice is not just a PDF looking thing. I'm literally gonna be sending it to somebody. So it's a formal record inside the business that says this customer owes this amount for this work. That means later on, when money shows up in the bank feed or when I manually enter a payment, I don't want to treat it as some random deposit. I literally want to connect that payment back to this invoice. That is literally what keeps the business books way cleaner. It also helps with reporting because now I'm not just seeing the revenue in a vague sense. I can see which invoices got paid, which customers still owe money, and what open receivables still exist. So after I've checked the customer, the line items, the dates, the notes, and the overall look, now I've also got choices. I can preview the invoice, save it, send it, or even leave it as a draft. And each one of those options has a practical use. Preview is actually great when I want to make sure the invoice looks the way I think it looks. Save is useful if I'm not ready to send it yet. Send is the obvious next move if everything is ready, of course. Then draft is good if I'm waiting on one more missing piece like a purchase order number or a final scope approval. So this is one of those areas where the software gives you flexibility, and that flexibility really matters because real client work is not always perfectly linear. Now let's say this monthly support plan is something Brightlane Media pays every month. This is where I can start thinking about efficiency, because if I create this exact invoice again and again and again, that's not hard, but it's very repetitive. And that repetitive admin work is exactly the kind of thing that I want softwares to help me reduce. So at this point, I would already be thinking about the recurring invoices feature. So if the service is the same, the amount is the same, and the schedule is predictable, then recurring invoices can save me a lot of time. So after creating the first manual version and making sure I like the structure, I can literally go into the recurring invoices and set up a recurring version for every monthly billing. That's especially useful for retainers, subscriptions, monthly support agreements, and any repeat service model where the client is billed on the same schedule over and over again. So as you can see here, we've set it for April 15th, but we want this to actually repeat monthly on the first day of each month. So I'm going to be setting up the first official automated invoice for May 1st. And I'm also going to make sure that the time zone is set correctly. And guys, always make sure to double check your time zone so your invoices don't land in your client's inbox at 3 a.m. or something. Now, let's also talk about the get paid section, because this is the most important part of the screen. You'll be able to see the option for automatic payments. And if you enable this, Wave is going to send payment pre-authorization with the first invoice. And the reason for doing this is actually because it allows your client to save their card or their banking info. And once they do, the chase is pretty much over. Wave will simply charge them every single month on the first and deposit the money into your account. So there's literally no need for manual emails, no checking in on any messages, none of that. Everything is going to be automated. So if you look at the breakdown here, Wave is actually pretty transparent with the fees. You're looking at 2.9% plus 60 cents for standard cards, or just 1% if they pay via bank transfer. Now, if you haven't set up your payments yet, I've also got a link down in the description to actually help you get started with Wave. So it's actually one of the few platforms that gives you this level of recurring automation for free, only while taking in a small cut when you actually get paid. So now we can actually go into the second part. Alright, so once you hit that get started button on the payment screen, Wave is then going to walk you through a 6-step verification process. So think of this as the KYC, which is also known as Know Your Customer process, and it's pretty much a bank level security check to make sure Tuli STO is a legitimate entity. So this is the fork in the road pretty much. So the first step is the business type. You'll see a list showing sole proprietorship, LLC, corporation, partnership, and non-profit. So if you're just starting out and haven't registered a formal entity yet, you're pretty much a sole proprietorship. But for our demo example today, and for most creators who are scaling, we are actually going to be selecting limited liability corporation. And the reason why I'm doing this is because an LLC creates a legal shield between your personal assets and your business. So if you're at the point where you're signing multi-$1,000 brand deals, you should really look into forming a limited liability corporation. And if you're an accountant doing this for a client, make sure you have their articles of incorporation or their tax ID handy with you. If you pick the wrong one here, you have to restart the whole verification process later on, which is a major headache. Now, once you select LLC, Wave is then going to ask for a bit more specificity: single member or multiple member. So a good way to think about this is that if you're the 100% owner of your business, the only person on the operating agreement, you are pretty much a single member LLC. So for the IRS, this is often treated as a disregarded entity, meaning the income flows directly to your personal tax return. If you have a business partner, a co-founder, or even an equal stakeholder in the business, you can select multiple member LLC. So I'm pretty much going to be selecting single member LLC for our example demo right now. So this is the most common setup for the solopreneur or the content creator who is the face and the owner of the brand. And as a tip, guys, don't get single member confused with having no employees. You can have a team of 10 people working for you and still be a single member LLC as long as you're pretty much the only sole owner. Alright, so once that's set, I'm now going to be clicking on next. Okay, and now we're in the heart of the setup, which is the business details screen. So this is what the bank uses to verify that Thule STO is a real and functioning business. So first up, the business address. Now, a huge heads up here, notice the fine print. It says PO box addresses cannot be accepted. So right now, I'm simply going to be entering our office address in San Francisco. So if you work from home, you're then going to have to enter your home address here. And don't worry, this isn't necessarily what shows up on your invoices, but the bank needs a physical location for anti-money laundering regulations. Now next is the website. So I'm going to be putting in thulesto.com. Now, if you don't have a formal website yet, you can often use your YouTube channel URL or even a professional LinkedIn profile. So the bank just wants to see that you actually do what you say you do. Now, you can also look at the you sell product, service, or both section. So for Thule STO, we're going to be selecting both. So let's say we provide consulting services, brand integrations, and we also have our digital downloads and merchandise. So both fits perfectly fine for this. Now next, I'm going to be selecting advertising services under the business category because this is the most accurate bucket for a YouTuber or content creator because we are essentially an advertising platform for brands. Now the next thing is the business description. So don't overthink this, guys. What I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to simply type in Thule STO Media Group provides digital educational content and brand marketing services via video tutorials. Okay, so simply make sure to keep it clean and professional. Now next, we have the EIN or tax ID. So this is literally your business's social security number. If you have an LLC, you should have your EIN from the IRS. And even if you use your social security number as a single member LLC, I always recommend getting an EIN. It keeps your personal social security off business documents and adds that extra layer of professionalism. So I'm just going to be entering our 9-digit ID right here. Okay. Now next is the trade name section. So for example, since my name is Mapalo and I'm doing business under Thule STO, I would simply have to put that here. But since our LLC is already named Thule STO Media Group, I'm going to be checking I didn't register my EIN with a DBA. Now finally, we also have the have you accepted credit cards in the past section. So for this, I'm going to simply hit yes. Now if this is your first time, you can just hit no. It won't hurt your application, they just want to know your history. So once this is all done, we can then save and continue. So from here, you'll then be able to see a note at the top about US banking regulations. Basically, they need to know who the beneficial owners are. So since Thule STO is a single member LLC, that's pretty much just me. Now, the next thing that I can do is simply enter the legal name. So I'm going to enter my full legal name here, like this. Okay. So simply make sure this matches your ID exactly. So if your ID says something like Mapalo A Piri and you just put in Mapalo Piri, it might trigger a manual review and slow down your ability to get paid. So next is the home address. So you notice the same rule applies here. No PO boxes allowed. So even if you have a separate business office, the bank needs to know where you personally reside. If it's the same as the business address we just entered before, you can simply click on this same address business checkbox. Now I'm simply going to be checking that box now. It simply saves you a lot of retyping. But if yours is different, simply take a second to fill it in accurately. Now the date of birth. So I'm just going to be scrolling through the month and day here. And keep in mind, you must be over 18 years old in order to be a primary account holder for Wave payments. So once that's all set up, you can then move over to the next section, which is the social security number section. Now I know it's the one piece of info nobody likes to type in into a website, but remember, Wave is a bank level secure platform. They simply need your SSN to verify your identity and to ensure that they can issue your 1099K at the end of the year if you hit the payment thresholds. So without this, the IRS simply won't let you process your brand new money. So I'm simply going to be entering the last 4 digits. Actually, Wave also usually asks for the full number here for the initial setup. So I'm going to be typing that in right now. Now, once that's all done, you can then hit save and continue. And now we're at step 4, which is the bank details section. So this is the most important step because this is where Wave is actually going to send your money. So you'll see a list of the major players: Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and even a note that says Wave partners with Plaid. Now the reason for this is that Plaid is the industry standard for secure bank connections. It's basically a secure tunnel between Wave and your bank, so you don't have to worry about your login credentials being stored by the software itself. Now you have actually 2 ways to do this. You can search for your bank using the search field, or if your bank already shows up in the options here, you can simply click on it. So let's say we go with Chase. Once we click on it, Wave is then going to take us straight to the manual entry screen. So even though they partner with Plaid for a fast sync, they're actually giving us the direct path here to make sure the data is 100% accurate. So the first field is the account name. So I'm basically going to be typing in Thule STO operating account. Okay, and this name is strictly for your eyes only. It's basically how you identify this account inside your Wave dashboard, especially if you end up adding a separate tax savings account later on. Now, you've also got a drop down here for business checking, business savings, personal checking, and personal savings. Now, for your primary payout account, you almost always want to select business checking, guys. It's really designed for the high volume in and out of a business, and it keeps your personal savings shielded from your business transactions. Okay, so once we've selected business check-in, you actually move over to the routing and account numbers. And this is the part where you really want to slow down. So if you don't have a checkbook handy, just open up your banking app on your phone. So for me, I'm going to be entering our 9-digit routing number right now. Okay, and then I'm going to move over to the account number. So once that's all done, you then have to do a quick double check on these digits. So if you have a typo here, your hard-earned money will literally go into limbo for 5 to 10 business days before it actually bounces back. So it's really worth doing a double check just to be sure. Okay, and now we're at step 5, which is customizing your customer's statement. So this might look like a minor aesthetic choice, but it's actually a vital difference for your business. So you'll see a field for business name. So right here, I'm going to be typing in Thule STO. Now notice that I have 9 characters remaining, so you generally get around 19 to 22 characters for a bank descriptor. And also look at the graphic on the screen, guys. So this shows you exactly how the charge will appear on your client's credit card or bank statement. So right now it says Wave Thule STO. Now why does this matter exactly? Well, imagine a brand manager is looking through their corporate card statement 3 weeks from now. If they see a charge with some random name, they might not recognize it. They might think it's a fraudulent charge and hit dispute. But if they see Thule STO, they immediately know, oh, that was the sponsorship fee for the Wave tutorial. And it actually makes more sense. So simply make sure the name that you put here matches the brand name your clients actually know you by. And by the way, if you're finding this tutorial helpful, simply make sure you've used the link in the description to sign up for Wave. It ensures your account is flagged for the latest merchant features that we're actually showing here. Now, once everything is done, we can then hit save and continue. And while the final verification screen pulls up, simply get ready because this is where we're about to go live. We've done the legal, we've done the personal, we've done the banking, and now we've actually done the branding. So we're only remaining with the final green light. And now we are basically at the finish line. So this is step 6, the ID scan section. So this is the official identity verification part because Wave is handling real money, which is your money. So US laws requires them to verify that the person behind the screen matches the documents we just submitted. So you see a prompt here which says you can use a passport, driver's license, or even a government ID card. So I always recommend using a driver's license because it's usually the easiest for their AI to scan and verify in real time. So simply make sure you're in a well-lit room, and if there's glare on the plastic of your ID, the system might reject it, and you'll simply have to wait for a manual review, which can take days. So just make sure to follow the tips in order to get it promptly verified. Notice there's also a countdown at the bottom, so Wave gives you a minute to actually get your physical ID out of your wallet. So you simply have to submit this, and it usually takes anywhere from a few minutes to even a few business days to get the final green light. And that's it. So once this is done, your payment setup is then going to be finalized. And now we can then move over to the next section. Now, before I move too far away from the sales side, one of the smartest practical things I can do is simply stop typing the same service manually all the time and just save it properly under products and services. So to do this, I can literally go into the products and services area. Then I can click add a product or service. Okay. And now I can literally create monthly support plan as a form of service. I can also enter the name. So we can enter monthly support plan as an example. Then I can also add the description if I want to. So like something like this. Okay. Then I can also set the default price to $1,200. And most importantly, I can connect it to the right income account. And this is one of those accounting details that can seem small when you're just looking at the screen, but it matters a lot because it tells Wave where this revenue belongs in the books. So for a simpler beginner setup, using a standard sales account is usually enough. But if later I want to separate different revenue streams, for example, I can create more detailed income accounts, but for now, sales works perfectly fine. So I can simply save it, and now the next time I create an invoice, I don't have to type monthly support plan manually. I can literally just select it, and then Wave will literally fill in the rest much faster. Now, this is where the platform starts showing its value a little bit more clearly. If it's your first time through, yes, there is a little bit of setup work, but that setup work reduces future admin work. So just think of it that way. The more reusable structure I build now, the less repetitive work I have to do later on. So products and services is one of those areas where beginners sometimes ignore, but it really does make the invoicing workflow much smoother once the business starts having repeat activity. Then I also want to make sure that my customers list is in good shape. So if I go into the customers, I can simply check that Brightline Media is saved here. If not, I can literally add them in. And if I know I already have several clients that I'm going to invoice regularly, I can also add them now too. Because again, this is part of reducing friction later. If I already know the business has 5 regular clients, getting them into the system early makes invoice creation much faster later on. It also makes reporting more useful because later I'll be able to run things like income by customer and quickly see who's contributing the most revenue. Now, once the sales side is in decent shape, the next practical move is to think about the money going outside of the business, because bookkeeping isn't just about collecting money. It's also about tracking what the business owes and what the business spends. So I'm going to move into the purchases by going over here. And this is where I deal with vendors and bills. So let's say Thule STO pays for a contractor, a design freelancer, internet service, software tools, and maybe even 1 or 2 outsourced services. I can literally start by creating vendors. So to do this, I'm going to go into the vendors section and simply add the people or businesses that I pay. So this might be a freelance video editor, a copywriter, a virtual assistant, a hosting company, or even a software provider. If the vendor is a contractor rather than a standard company, I can classify them that way when I create the record. This can really matter later, especially for cleanup record keeping and tax-related documentation. Then once those vendors are set up, I can now go into bills. Then from here, I can now create the actual bills that the business owes. So if a freelancer sends Thule STO an invoice for $500, I can create that bill inside Wave. So what I would have to do is that I would simply have to select the vendor, then enter the bill date, okay, then the due date, all right, and then the line items and the expense category. So maybe I can create a bill for video editing support, choose a contractor or professional service expense category, and then finally save it. Now, just like customer invoices represent money owed to me, bills literally represent money that I owe out. And that's an important mental model because it helps the whole platform feel more coherent. The sell side is incoming obligations to me, and then the purchaser side is outgoing obligations from me. Then after the sales and purchase structures are both there, I can now move into accounting. And this is where Wave really starts behaving like a bookkeeping software rather than just an invoicing tool. So inside accounting, one of the biggest areas is transactions. And this is where all the real money movement gets recorded. So I can literally open transactions by going over here. And Wave literally gives me the main ways to bring transactions in. I can import automatically, add a CSV, or even add transactions manually. So since we're focusing on a beginner-friendly starter workflow, let's think in practical terms. If I've got a bank statement in CSV format, I can upload that. But if not, I can still enter the key transactions manually. So let's say I upload a CSV from Tuli STO's business bank account. Once those transactions appear, this is where the real bookkeeping work begins. Because now I'm not just working with templates and lists anymore, I'm actually working with actual money movement. So now I'll actually be able to see money coming in and money going out. But the problem is that Wave doesn't automatically know what each line item means unless I tell it. So line by line, I literally now need to review and categorize everything carefully. So maybe I see the $1,200 payment from Bright Lane Media. If that matches the invoice I created earlier, I do not want to mark it as a generic income and move on. What I want to do instead is match it to the invoice. That way the invoice status updates correctly, the customer record stays accurate, and the business books remain cleaner. Then maybe I see software expenses like Canva, ChatGPT, Zoom, or even hosting. Those can go under software or subscriptions expense. Maybe I might also see a phone bill that can go under communications or telephone expense. And on top of this, maybe I might see something like a contractor payment that could go into contractor expense or professional services. And this is where Wave starts to matter as a bookkeeping tool, because the quality of your categorization directly affects the quality of your reports later on. And this is where it also helps to slow down instead of trying to process everything as fast as possible. Because a common beginner mistake is thinking bookkeeping is mainly about speed. It's really not, guys, it's not. It's about deciding what each transaction actually means in accounting terms. So if I rush and just choose whatever category looks vaguely close, the books may look finished, but the reports later on become very misleading. So the mindset here is accuracy first, speed second. And over time, speed just becomes natural because you start recognizing patterns. Now, as I walk through those transactions, the dashboard actually starts changing. The income and expense widgets start reflecting real activity. The charts will stop looking empty. The account really starts to feel alive instead of just looking like a shell. And that's usually the moment where bookkeeping software starts feeling rewarding. Because before this point, it can feel like a lot of setup work without much visible payoff. But once transactions start flowing in and categories start making sense, the system starts giving something back. Now, after I've recorded and categorized enough transactions, I can also start thinking about reconciliation. And the simplest way to describe reconciliation is that it's literally how I check whether the books in Wave match what actually happened in the real accounts. So what I can do is simply turn on reconciliations from the transactions area, choose the account that I want to reconcile, enter the statement ending date and the closing balance from the real bank statement, and then compare that against what Wave says the account balance should be. So if the numbers match, then that's amazing. That means the records are actually lining up. But if they don't, then something is missing, duplicated, or wrong. So reconciliation is not really some mysteriously advanced accounting ritual. It's basically my accuracy check. It's the step that tells me whether the records are trustworthy. Then from there, I can also look at the chart of accounts, which is where the full category structure under the books actually lives. So I don't necessarily need to rebuild the whole thing on day one, but I do want to understand what's there. Because every single income and expense category I've been using in transactions eventually lands somewhere in this larger structure. So this is where the logic of the books lives underneath the surface. And once you understand that, the platform literally starts feeling a lot more coherent. And then finally, I also get into reports. So this is where all the setup work starts paying off. So if I open the profit and loss, this tells me whether Tuli STO is actually making money over a given period of time. Then I can also open the balance sheet, which tells me what the business owns and what it owes at a certain point in time. From here, I can also open the cash flow, which shows me how money is moving in and how money is moving out. And this really matters because a business can sometimes look profitable, but still have some timing issues with cash. And then once I want more detail, I can also look at reports like income by customer, purchases by vendor, and other detailed views that help me understand what's driving the business results. So if I zoom all the way out, what we've really done here is take Wave from a blank account and turn it into a working business system. We used the invoice screen to create a real financial event. We went ahead and built reusable customers and services. We also set up the expense side with vendors and bills. We brought in transactions, categorized them carefully. We also checked them through reconciliation and then used reports to turn all of that activity into real visibility. And that's really the point of using Wave properly, not just to show where the buttons are, but to actually understand how all the parts work together. Because once you understand that workflow, Wave stops feeling like a collection of pages and actually starts feeling like one connected business system. Customers and services feed invoices, vendors and bills track what you owe, transactions record real money movement, reconciliation checks the accuracy, reports shows you the result, and once that clicks, the platform literally becomes much easier to use, much more valuable, and much less intimidating every time you log in. And that literally is it. I really hope you found this insightful in some way. If you did, then make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.